Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Dailies, your morning program where we keep you updated with all the stories that are dropping from the Nigerian newspaper. I am Sarah Elisha Dasham. Remember, you can join us via Facebook and drop your inputs, your contribution, and your views concerning any of the story that is of interest to you. And I'll be doing the program alongside Rachel Tansey. Good morning.
Morning, Sarah.
All right, let's go straight into the paper, starting with the Vanguard newspaper.
The big story on Vanguard minimum wage, federal government calls committee meeting. Labour insists on May 31st deadline, vows to down tools if federal government states OPS to present proposals. Labour maintains call for living wage, says government racing against time. Federal government directs marketers to open CNG points at petrol stations. On Edo Guba, no collection of PVCs by proxy. INEC tells Edo Ondo electorate. Obaseki APC beaker over propaganda against Oba's palace. Fubara laments debt owed contractors by Wike's administration. Details can be found on page 12. ASU threatens nationwide strike over absence of varsity governing councils and others. Details can be found on page 32. Tinubu Shetima now to pay toll gate fees at airports, a statement from the federal government. Some foreign missions charge in dollars, determine own FX rates. This is coming from EFCC, and I believe this is something that needs to be looked into. You can find details on page 9. Manufacturers spend more on security than taxes coming from man. And looking at the security situation of the country, we know that definitely manufacturers have to do something to secure their properties and all of that. You can find details on page 20. For sports, Nigeria versus South Africa, injury worries for Finidi. Details can be found on page 38. And then a column by Febabalola on page 22. And then we have a picture story where we can see AIG Omokude meets French president. We're talking about Macron here. And that's all the news on Vanguard newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at the Metrics newspaper where we have Nigeria's oil production rose to 1.28 million barrels per day in April, highest in Africa, a report coming from OPEC. You can find detail of that in the paper. And cybersecurity levy, finally federal government bows to pressure. Announces suspension to review modalities for its implementation, more detail in the paper. Custom to splash 12.5 billion naira on Toyota SUVs, 522 million naira on insurance for vehicles. You can find that in the paper. Amid 82% revenue loss, Tinubu Shetima VIPs to pay toll fee at airport, says Kiamu. And this is leadership by example. We hope that this is not just on the paper, but we hope to see that our leaders are leading by example by also paying at the toll gate before getting passage. And on economy, Tinubu takes big and bold decision. Federal government to splash over 2 trillion naira on coastal highway, several other road projects. FEC OK's fresh investment in infrastructure and housing sector. Federal government to tap opportunities in digital economy, improve startups hub in US. You can find detail on page 2. Again, Fubara bombs Wike says most project commission not fully funded. Also, we have 6 more kidnapped conference varsity student regain freedom, says the Kogi government. We will recall 14 actually gained their freedom, and now we're having 6 more. That is to leave about 4 more because there were about 24 students that were being abducted. So we look forward to seeing the remaining being rescued as well. 11 companies get CBN's agent right for crude oil gas export in Nigeria, data found in the paper. And we also have a picture story extending continental shelf. You can see the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu report from the Committee on Extended Continental Shelf as Nigeria gains additional territory. So you can do well to grab the paper in more detail of any other story that is of interest to you.
On Nigerian News Direct, Nigeria gains additional 16,200 square meter maritime territory. Thrive Agric is ranked amongst Africa's fastest growing companies. Bonga Fields records 36% growth in oil production in 2023. Details can be found on page 10. Airtel unveils new unlimited plan for business owners. The big story, digital economy. Federal government unveils SPV to improve internet penetration, GDP growth. To build third longest terrestrial fiber optic backbone in Africa, targets 1.5% GDP growth, 70% broadband penetration. Details can be found on page 9. Removal of APC logo, Tinubu portrayed from Aribasola's office felt mixed feelings. Why we have not reconstructed Abeokuta train station, Ogun government explains. You can find details on page 2, and that's all the news on Nigerian News Direct.
On New Telegraph coming from the World Bank, private sector injects $133 million into the Nigerian's infrastructure. Naira plunges into 1,520 Naira 40 kobo to a dollar on the official market. You can see more detail of that on page 25. Tinubu excited as Nigerian gains additional 200 nautical miles on extended continental shelf. Science and tech will save Nigeria's economy from implosion, coming from the Vice President. Edo Ondo Guba INEC gives condition for accreditation of observers. You can find detail inside the paper. Alleged 19 billion naira fraud, Sirika absent stores arraignment. You can find detail of that also on page 4. And the big story here, another academic disruption looms, where we're saying ASU is giving the federal government 2 weeks to reconstitute council and meet other demands, since Nigeria's education budget is the lowest in West Africa. And we will recall they have been talking about them not having a governing council that will look into so many things in the university. So we are seeing that this is one of the reasons they might actually go on a strike if the federal government do not do something about that. You can do well to read more detail on page 2 and on page 28. On insecurity, headers kill a pregnant woman and 10 others in Benue State. You can find detail on page 6 and 7. And on protest, don't derail our plan for power industry. Minister pleads with Labour. We have been abandoned. APC women leaders are lamenting. You can do a trade why they say that. And revealed here we have 12 million naira school fees make Harbour University Nigerians most expensive schools to attend. You can do well to read that on page 6. Tinubu Sheitima VIPs and others to pay airport toll and parking fees coming from FEC. And then we have Binance blackmailing lawmakers to escape prosecution. This is coming from reps. You can do well to read more detail. We have a picture story on the front page of the paper. You can do well to read more. And we also have a study here on page 7, which I think is very important for strengthening of hair for everyone who wants to have a good and a healthy hair. You can read that on page 7. And that's all on New Telegraph newspaper.
On Daily Independent, federal government to deploy 20 trillion naira pension funds to drive economic growth. The writer says to invest in housing, power, rails, road, and technology. OK's 96.279 billion naira for generators for State House, street lights, and bus terminals. Approves private partnership to transform infrastructure housing sector. Begs NLC TUC not to derail plan for electricity sector. You can start with the details on the front page. Tinubu Shetima to pay toll at airport gate. Keyamo says no more exemptions. VIPs must now pay. We inherited huge debt burden from Wike's administration. Fubara is starting to lament. You can start with the details on the front page. Alleged 19.4 billion naira fraud. Ex-aviation minister Sirika brother Sean caught. Obi's meeting with Atiku Saraki orders not connected to 2027. This is coming from Labour. You can find details on page 6. DSS invades court, arrests defendants despite judge warning. Details can be found on page 6. Aviation Ministry justifies $300 levy on helicopter operators. ASU threatens strike over non-constitution of varsities governing councils. One Tinubu academic staff dying over cost of living. NEC reconvenes in 2 weeks to take decisive action. And at the downside of the paper, foreign investors to get visas within 48 hours. An assurance coming from the federal government. Details can be found on page 6, and that's all the news on Daily Independent.
It's so sad that ASU will have to resolve to going for another strike again as a result of negligence coming from our leaders, because this is a clear indication of that, Rachel. We will recall, was it last week or so, we're seeing the breakdown of why ASU might go on a strike. When they were talking about them not having a governance council, whereby we are supposed to have a council that will supersede so many things such as inspection, opening of new department, employment of new staffs and all of that. And then we're seeing that some of the procedures that you need to follow before certain things are being done. If only there is a governance council in the school, we will not see issues such as this coming up. And then all of this, prolonging of certain matters before it will be solved. And here we're seeing that, they're even complaining the fact that even the living costs, we saw what happened when they were not paid some of their arrears when they went on a strike because of certain things which they told the federal government, you need to meet up with certain of our demands, and the government didn't. We saw where professors died. We've seen even where there was an increase of tuition fee. A number of students were complaining, going around with placard, demonstrating and all of that. So I'm hoping that, the federal government needs to look at. This is one of the sectors we're seeing that, education is one of the sectors that is poorly being budgeted in West Africa. And it's very sad that we are not giving education the needed attention that it needs. No wonder people look for a way to go study abroad or any other West African country that you begin to wonder, why are Nigerians studying in such a country like this? We look more better than they are, but because we refuse to put certain things on ground, and that's why we're seeing things that happen like. So I'm looking forward to the federal government is having 2 weeks to rectify this. I don't know the magic they can do if they have refused to do this for all these years that they have been given, if they will be able to manage to come up with something in 2 weeks. But I'm pleading that the federal government should please look into this issue, because we know once we shift our attention from a particular place, we don't go back there again. We focus on other things that are not relevant. So let's see what the federal government will do, because most schools are just starting the second semester or the first semester, depending on how the academic calendar is. But I'm looking forward to seeing the federal government stepping in and setting up this council so we'll be able to have things with smooth running of our universities eventually.
Take the government nothing to set up a governing council. For that reason, they should do it, because I believe that this shouldn't be a reason for us to go on strike. It's important to have one, and we can see that lack of one is the reason why universities are where they are. The growth we are seeing is not there. Certain things that should not even be a problem is a problem in the first place. So this is a very big reason for ASU to threaten the federal government. But just as we always talk about how we do not like this threat of strike, must we say we will go for strike before the government of Nigeria listening to individuals, unions, or a body trying to get certain things done? Why haven't we? Because it is part of a process to run a school, to run varsities precisely. It has been put in place that there's a need for a governing council. So why haven't we have it for all these years? And it kills boil down to we are sleeping on our jobs. We're sleeping on our duties, because these things are supposed to be put in place, put down all the modalities that will make sure that this structure doesn't shake whatsoever, because the governing council is not a political position. It has nothing to do with the politics of the country. It has nothing to do with administration changing, administration coming and going. You fix it, you put the modalities that it's supposed to govern the governing council concerning how long members are a part of it, and when new members come on board, the qualification, the criteria, and all of that, and we move. It won't cost the government anything. So for that reason, they shouldn't allow it to get to where it is, to the extent that ASU would think that the only way the government can hear them is by threatening that they will go on a strike. Let them act quickly. 2 weeks is enough for them to start rolling out plans for it. Nominees, who are the people that will make up for it? What will it be that will be put in place for this governing council precisely? And then let's move. For me personally, I don't see this as a big problem, as long as the government will wake up and work immediately. But because we don't do the little things, they become big problems. I think that's the problem we have in this country. So this should be one of those things that let's see quick action, so that we won't be seeing any, because honestly I'm just looking forward to a smooth academic year for the year 2024, starting the next 2024-25 session. Let it be smooth for this student. Maybe for the first time in a long while we would have graduates who just spent 4 years in school eventually, and hopefully we look forward to that, Celine.
Honestly. Well, let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. And on the Punch, we're looking at policy bliss, where we have Tinubu's unveiled 21 major initiatives after marathon FEC meeting, among which is a 2 trillion naira mortgage initiative. President and all Nigerians are to pay the airport toll, and then ban on sand degrading 10 kilometers from bridges, new Lagos airport recovery system, 90,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable, 7 trillion naira US tech hub for Nigerians, 51 billion naira, and Abuja airport and terminal hubs, revenue platform from lottery businesses, and then 546 billion naira roads in state. These are part of the initiative that the president have actually. You can look more of the initiatives on page 2 and 20 of the Punch newspaper. Also here we are having FT leads BHM among Africa's fastest growing companies. The big story here, we are having the EFCC raid speculators as Naira drops to 1,540 Naira to a dollar. In Lega BDC operators, speculators raid in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Kanu rather. More detail found on page 17. And on minimum wage, Labour insists on May 31st deadline. We will recall that during the Workers' Day, they gave the federal government deadline of May 31st as ending of this month to look into it. And today is already 15th, so we have about 16 days to go. We hope that something will be done concerning coming up with something what, the minimum wage. You can look more of that on page 7. JAM releases more UTME results for those who are unable to, they have not seen their JAM result. You do well to check your portal as well as your email. Maybe you actually get your results there. Marketers order to open pumps for CNG vehicles. You can find that on page 18. Police say banker stole customers 650 million naira. You can do well to find more in the paper. And Fubara tackles Wiki over Rivers' heavy debt. You can find more of that on page 25. And that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, I inherited huge debt from Wike. Statement from Fubara. Bandits sack 50 villages in Zamfara. UK keenly watching Nigeria's police economic reforms. This is coming from the British envoy. Sets agenda for legislature. Details can be found on page 2. The big story, federal government eyes pension fund, orders for infrastructure development, explains why it suspended cybersecurity levy. Tinubu Shetima to now pay toll at airport. How 17-year-old boy threatened bank with fake explosive device to demand 100 million naira. I believe that is what happened in Plateau State, the story we saw yesterday. You can find details on page 27. 5.9 million Nigerian children face severe food nutrition crisis. This is a report from UN. Details can be found on page 30. Nigeria ranks lowest in education budget in West Africa. A report from ASU threatens nationwide strike. Details can be found on page 4. And it's sad that the giant of Africa is ranking the lowest when it comes to education budget in West Africa. I just hope that the government seeing this report will sit up and do something about it urgently. Obasanjo backs alternative system of government in Nigeria, says Western liberal democracy has failed to deliver. Reps unveil plans to hold national conference in July. On Ondo Guba, court orders APC Aiyedatiwa INEC to file defense in suit seeking to sack governor as APC candidate. APC asks CJ to transfer case from Abuja to Akure. Details can be found on page 8 and 13. Some manufacturers spend more on security than taxes, coming from the Director General of MAN. Details can be found on page 6, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
On the Nation newspaper, we're having Speaker lashes Minister for opposing plan to marry off 100 girls. We will recall the story we saw coming from Niger State, where the Speaker said he'll be sponsoring 100 girls' wedding. And here the Speaker is being lashes the Minister for opposing the plan to marry off 100 girls. You can do well to find detail of that story. Nigerian gains additional 16,300 square kilometer maritime territory. And also we are having APC asked the court to move GMO case against Ayedatiwa to Akure. More detail can be found in the paper. CNG sell point to be made compulsory at petrol stations. And also we're having JAM releases another 36,540 UTME results. Minister is saying that electricity tariff hike reversal would derail reform plan. Federal government seek labor's understanding, and then 85% of consumers still enjoying subsidy. You can do well to find more detail of that inside the paper. Bank manager arrested for allegedly defrauding customers of 650 million naira. You can find that on page 5 of the Nation newspaper, and that's all on the Nation newspaper.
On Daily Sun, Abia government drags Opezu to EFCC over alleged 10 billion naira earmarked for airport project. Ex-governor left 3.49 billion naira for OT, says former commissioner. Details can be found on page 28. The big story, ASU issues strike notice, accuses Tinubu of nonchalance over education, says varsities operating illegally in last 1 year without governing council, gives 2-week ultimatum. O2 secures $3.5 billion Afrexim Bank funding for Bakassi Deep Seaport. Details can be found on page 2. In Zamfara, over 500 people in bandit captivity in Zurmi. This is a report from the reps. You can find details on page 5. Traditional ruler, 2 others killed, 17 houses, 10 bikes burned over land dispute in Benue. Leah Shaibu, Chibok girls, Christian group stages protest, tax federal government to rescue abducted schoolgirls. Fubara vows to open up on inherited debt soon, says his government burdened by it. Still on Daily Sun newspaper, Niger speaker distance self from marriage of 100 girls, accuses Women Affairs Minister of misleading public. We didn't solicit bribe from Binance, coming from Reps panel. You can find details on page 29. Alleged 19.4 billion naira fraud, EFCC to arraign Sirika brother on fresh charges. Files new charge against ex-CBN Governor Emefiele over printing of naira notes. 20 trillion naira pension funds to go into housing infrastructure, coming from the federal government. Details can be found on page 29. We have a picture story from the right to left. Executive Vice President, Intra-African Trade Bank, Mr. Kanayo, Governor Basi Edet, Utu of Cross River State, President and Chairman of Board, Africa Export and Import Bank. And then we have Professor Benedict Orama and Executive Vice President, Global Trade Bank, Mr. Haytam, after a meeting. And that's all the news on Daily Sun newspaper.
On this day newspaper, Naira continues to weaken against the dollar. Official window 1,520 Naira to 4. I take that story again. Naira continues to weaken against dollar. Official window is 1,520 Naira 40 kobo to a dollar. Parallel market is 1,535 Naira to a dollar. NACCIMA decries depreciation, expresses concern over impact on imports. You can find more detail of that on page 9. CBN appoint 9 pre-shipment inspection agent, 2 evaluation team for oil and gas export. And UN grants Nigerian additional maritime territory. You can find detail of that in the paper. The big story for this day says presidency VIPs now to pay at airport toll gates after the 10 billion naira loss. Aviation sector gets approval to procure 4.2 billion naira aircraft recovery equipment. Says cybersecurity levy suspended for review. Federal government to transform infrastructure and housing sector. Target 20 trillion naira pension fund for development to provide 48-hour visa service for investors. Urges Labour not to derail power sector transformation plan to look into electricity tariff hike. More detail of that can be found in the paper. We have two picture stories on the front page of this day, which I think is very enticing. So you can do well to grab the paper, read more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you this morning.
On the Guardian newspaper, the big story, illegal mining. Nigeria's $1.8 billion gold reserves mined into private pocket. You can find details on page 6. But then we have an infograph of countries with the highest. And then Nigeria turns out to be the lowest. We are at 21.37 tons. And then the United States of America is the highest with 8,133, followed by Germany with 3,353, followed by Italy, France. We can see Japan, we can see Switzerland, we can see China in there, and then other countries also at the bottom with 479 tons. Painters back life imprisonment for sexually assaulting 20-year-old neighbor. Minister goes to court petitions IGP over mass wedding for 100 orphan girls. Details can be found on page 29. Fubara hits harder, says Rivers battling huge debts left behind by Wiki. Bandits kidnap 500 Zamfara residents, kill 2 police and 3 others. Tinubu Shetima orders to pay access fees at toll gates henceforth. Tinubu suspends implementation of cybersecurity levy. Nigeria considers compulsory installation of CNG pumps at fuel stations. Details can be found on page 15, and that's all the news on the Guardian newspaper.
All right, we'd love to take a time out at this moment, let you chew the stories. What do you feel about any of the story looking at ASU threatening to go on a strike after 2 weeks if the federal government do not look into setting up a governing council, as well as we're seeing Labour also giving the federal government the end of this month to do something concerning minimum wage, or they actually raise another industrial action. So we would love to hear your own input concerning the story. Please stay tuned with us. We'll be back and continue with the paper review.
The gospel of Jesus Christ is our Heavenly Father's plan for the happiness and salvation of His children. Equa Television International shares the gospel of Jesus Christ because the world must come to the realization of the power in the atonement of sin through the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. Sharing with the world the message of hope that can clean anyone from sin to enjoy the peace that is in Him. Equa Television International is live 24/7, preaching the message of salvation and truth to the world. Pray for Equa TV. Support Equa TV. Be part of Equa TV. Keep watching Equa Television International.
Thank you for staying tuned. It's still the Dailies. We have been looking at a number of stories on the front page of the papers where we will love you to be part of it. Remember to drop your comment on Facebook because we are interested in what your own opinions are concerning the issues that have been on the paper, where we're seeing some of the policies that the federal government have actually decided during the FEC meeting, which include henceforth they will be having that no VIP. Everybody's going to be paying henceforth at the airport toll gate. So we're seeing that the president, the vice president will be leading by example as well. And also we're seeing that Labour is giving the federal government till the end of this month to come up with minimum wage, and the federal government is seeing how they can meet with the committee to see how far they have gone concerning that. So you should just keep your fingers crossed as we look into more detail of other stories on the paper. I still have Rachel Tenzi with me. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome, Sarah.
All right, let's take a look at the leadership newspaper. FCTA to demolish another 500 illegal structures. This is coming from the Minister of the FCT. You can look more detail of that on page 17. Protests in Kaduna over Chibok and Dapchin girls. We hope that the government has not forgotten these ladies there. They can do something to see that they are back to be reunited with their loved ones. More detail found on page 12. And what's trending here, we have Atiku accuses Wike of pursuing his personal interest in PDP. Federal government set to receive fresh $2.25 billion loan. You can find more detail of both stories on page 4. Despite the PIA, which is the Petroleum Industrial Act, petrol import monopoly persists. You can find more detail where we're seeing as forest crisis frustrate marketers. More detail of that can be found on page 6. 80 residents missing after bandit attack Castina community. Boni appoint late Emir of Kadu's son as successor. You can find detail in the paper. ISWAP founder's son surrenders in Borno, and then asked to issue fresh ultimatum over varsity governing council. Federal government bows to pressure, suspend cybersecurity levy, detail found on page 17. And on the airport access fee, no more VIPs. Everybody must pay. Federal government declares, where we're seeing side losses to preferential treatment, target 10 billion naira revenue. Tinubu, Shetima, Pabio, Abbas, others not exempted. Deploy technology for monitoring. This is coming from stakeholders. You can find detail of that on page 6, and that's all on the leadership newspaper.
On Blueprint newspaper, FEC officially suspends cybersecurity levy to review policy. Minister rejects Speaker's plan to marry off 100 Niger girls. Lawmaker kicks. Oluokere show of under-17 Women World Cup ticket. This is on sports. Details can be found on page 32. On business, CBN appoints 11 pre-shipment agents for crude oil and gas exports. Details can be found on page 31. And we have Buni appoints Muhammadu Ibn Grima as new emir of Tikal. You can find details on page 29. The big story on the paper, shift from presidential system. Obasanjo backs reps group, advocates Afro-democracy, says Western liberal democracy has failed its originators. Group gets 500 essays from Nigerian students, holds national discourse July 1st. You can start with the details on the front page. Terrorists sack 50 communities, abduct hundreds in Zamfara, kill 3, kidnap pastor, wife, others in Niger community. On insecurity, 60% Northeast manufacturers shut out of business. ASU threatens strike over absence of varsities governing council. My administration overstretched by debt inherited from Wike. Coming from Fubara, you can find details on page 6. Tinubu Shetima orders VPs to pay airport access fee. Coming from Kinyamo, you can find details on page 20, and these are the major news on Blueprint newspaper.
On the Daily Times newspaper, job for cash, Senate considers stiffer penalty for violators. You can find more detail of that story in the paper. Uproar over fresh quit notice to Fulanis from Hausa land. You can find detail of that on page 4. Coming from Kaduna State, patient referred due to lack of power of fuel in General Hospital dies. Patient referred due to lack of power and fuel in a general hospital dies. And this is really a very sad one, that a general hospital over there at Sabon Tasha called actually lost one of its patients because of lack of power. And this is what we have been saying, that the issue of power is not just about, we're seeing that even the health sector has not been left out. So I hope that the government of the day will look into what they can do about that, because you can imagine how many more people would die. I remember there was a time that if you need your loved one to be operated on, you have to buy the fuel or the diesel
Yes.
to power the generator for that operation. Rachel, in a time like this, how many people can afford that? So I'm looking forward to, honestly, Rachel, I don't know how things are going in this country. It's very sad and it sounds very foreign and strange and alien. I mean, I'm just trying to wrap my head if this is supposed to be the norm of the way things are supposed to go, but this is not normal. And I just hope that we don't normalize it and feel that it's okay for a patient. Imagine that after paying whatever you need to pay for treatment of your ward, you still have to go buy the diesel or have to buy other things that need to carry out maybe an operation on your loved one. I hope that we pass the stage someday. I honestly look forward to that, Rachel.
So that is currently the ordeal of Nigerians as it is now. It started years back, and this might be on the extreme level, but as little as the gloves that the doctor needs to use to check you in some hospitals, you buy them. As it is now. This is not just something that we are not aware of. It's not just story, it's not just rumor, it's reality. When you go to the hospital and you need certain treatment, you have to even pay for your syringe. You have
You
to
go
pay
buy
for
your drips
you
and
buy
all of
all
that.
everything, the tube that is needed for the drip, everything, the gloves and everything you need to buy. Even recently, some people are lamenting that they have to buy the file in which the report that the doctor needs to come and check will be put into it. Yes, this was the testimony of someone who just recently lost his wife, and then we went to greet and he was just lamenting of their ordeal in the hospital. Nothing whatsoever. You have to pay for every little service that will be provided to you. This is what our government hospitals have become. So, Sele, when we talk about JAPA, it's not only because these doctors are not being paid well, but they are not even functioning well, Sele. Because the basic things they need to function is not available. So if you are a doctor and you are saying that due to the lack of facilities, I am good at what I do, but due to the lack of facility,
Cannot
patients are going to
function
die
well.
in my hands. Would you rather go where you will be functional and you know that due to the negligence of your government, you will not have cases that are not, you not have casualties that you're not even supposed to have. We've talked about this over and over. There's so many things going on in the health sector in this country that we need an emergency in our health sector. If not, we just have to be seen being healthy, being out of the hospital as a miracle. And then when you see what people are going through in the hospital, you just have more reason to pray harder to be healthy, Celia, because it is sad what people are going through. You don't want to imagine it, and then when you go there and you see it, it breaks your heart on so many levels. And it's not surprising that a patient will die because of lack of electricity, and you just can't help but wonder, is this where we have gotten to? That lack of power will be the reason that someone is no longer alive today. It's really, really sad. And this has made it to the paper. What about the so many that haven't made it to the paper? You know, you can't, it's sad. I don't even want to think about it sometimes. But when it comes up like this, you just have to talk about it. I just hope that the government of Nigeria is really willing to wake up and do the work. There's so much out there, but you've told us that you are capable. So show us your capacity when it comes to things like this. But truly, our health sector is one of that sector that needs a comeback. It needs to get to the level it never was in the past.
Honestly, it's very sad, Rachel. Just like you said, this is just one that made it to the paper. We have so many backstories that have not made it to the paper. And I remember I have been a victim, Rachel, where there was no electricity in one of the general hospitals, and then I just couldn't help it. I was fighting with what was disturbing me, and then yet there were these big and mighty mosquitoes, and then yet there was no power, none of that. But just like you say, we're looking forward to a growth, honestly, because I mean, it was in the paper, we're seeing how much has been budgeted for street lights in the house, Rachel, in the state house. We're talking about street light in the state house, and then yet we're having hospitals that cannot function well.
Yeah.
No wonder our doctors are leaving, because they rather have a clear conscience and have all that is needed than to have on their conscience that so many people died
Yes.
because of lack of. So we look forward to seeing
Yeah.
something better being done. Still on the Daily Times, we have UN says that about 5.9 million Nigerian children facing malnutrition and hunger. And this has been a story we saw that beginning of the year, Rachel, where a
Yeah.
number of children cannot even have, and I think kids are supposed to have protein in their meal, and we
Yes.
saw how much egg is right now, Rachel. So we're seeing that it's part of the reasons. We look forward to seeing something better. And on insecurity, how Dangote workers were kidnapped in Edo State. Security requires stakeholders' collaboration, says the Speaker Abbas. Interior Minister tips National Productivity Center to achieve full potential. And the last story on the paper here, Rivers highly burdened by huge debts from weak government, says Fubara. You can find more detail of that in the paper, and that's all on Daily Times newspaper.
Unsweet crude reports Nigeria earns 1.26 trillion naira from gas exports in 3 months. U.S. Congress seeks reopening of controversial OPL 245 case against Shell and Eni. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 2. Why Bonga is such a success, coming from SNEPC Co. MD. Nigeria to unveil 2024 licensing round, details in Paris. Details can be found on page 2, and that's all the news on Sweet Crude Reports.
On the Business Times newspaper, Tinubu suspend a 0.5% cybersecurity levy, detailed on page 2. MBS to produce data using artificial intelligence, and we have PIA to boost Nigerians' oil bidding success, says the PETAN. More detail on page 4. Disbursement of the CVFF will enhance shipping development, coming from Oyetola. Urges collaboration among regulators, stakeholders to streamline processes, enhance efficiency of the sector, data found in the paper. BOI launches initiative to enhance access to capital for rural businesses. Federal government begins 2024 oil block bidding round. And we have CITN advocates sustainable tax culture for economic development. More detail of that can be found on page 4. Federal government unveils software to showcase Nigeria's mineral resources to investors. More detail can be found on page 2. We have a picture story where we can see operatives of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency intercepting of some drugs that were able to get in a local government area of Lagos State. You can do well to grab the paper, read more detail, and we also have gainers of the equity, losers of it, and then how things have been so far. And that's all on the Business Times newspaper.
On Punch Sport Extra, Arsenal's agony. Citizens beat Spurs to boost title defense. African King Arena reclaims continental title in Rwanda. Then we have Safest Hands Nadozi dedicates Keepers Award to club. Finidi deserves Eagles job, coming from Awoniyi. United eye trial to replace Varane. We have Chilwell Chukwu Umeka return. Details can be found on page 4. Newcastle not selling £100 million Gordon. And with the big story, like Eagles, like Bafana, Chukwueze tops Eagles injury list ahead South Africa World Cup clash. Bafana battle fitness concerns. Starving for success, rise of teen sensation Ajana. You can find details on page 6. Special Eagles captain eyes World Cup slot. Amusan Harrison renew rivalry in Atlanta Saturday. Details can be found on page 2, and that's all the news on Punch Sports Extra.
On Business Day newspaper, Naira slides swell oil loans by 78% to 11.8 trillion naira, account for 26% of total loan. Banks allowing loan repayment till maturity, coming from the IMF. Banks earning more than tripled to 1.1 trillion naira on CBN's rate hike. GTCO, Zenith, FCMB lead in profit growth. 25 Nigerian firms make FT 2024 Africa's fastest growing list. More landlords may become retailers as 80 Ijebu Lekki buildings unapproved. You can find more detail of that in the paper. Air cargo volumes in Nigeria trailing over rising inflation. More detail of that found in the paper. And we have a picture story on the front page still talking about what happened during the weekend. You can do well to grab the paper and read more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Sporting Sun newspaper, Chelsea close to agree personal terms with Osimhen. Injured striker undergoes therapy with Napoli physio. You can find details on page 2. Aruna Kadri reclaims ITTF Africa Cup. You can find details on page 7. Haaland delivers for City. Varane announces Man United exit. Uncertainty looms over Modric's future at Real Madrid. And on WAFU BU 17 championship CAF, MRI clears 20 Golden Eaglet player 100% clean. I believe that's on drug test. You can find details on page 6. Mike Tyson promises to shake sports world against Jake Paul. Details at the back page. And then we have Besiktas Galatasaray Fibonacci battle for a Henacho. You can find details on page 6. Nadozi delighted to win Best Goalkeeper Award in France. Details can be found on page 6. And that's all the news on Sporting Sun newspaper.
Well, that's how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Rachel, for doing this with me.
You're welcome, Sarah.
And thank you also to our viewers. Thank you to our supporters. We look forward again to meeting you tomorrow. Do have a great day ahead.